स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतार वरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः. So we were discussing the great master, and last time we saw how Swami Shardanji says that an avatara, a prophet or an avatara, comes to re-establish religion. That's the meaning of what I just now chanted. Sthapakaya cha dharmasya. Sthapana means to establish. But how does he establish? Sarva dharma swarupini. If he is the embodiment of all religions, then what is the new religion that he establishes? So in Sri Ramakrishna's case, there was no religion, no particular religion he came to establish. He just came to strengthen the individual religions, the religions which already existed, the paths that already existed to the same goal. Throughout history, we find there were so many paths discovered by so many prophets. So he came to validate them in the sense he came to re-establish those religions which had perhaps the followers of particular religions, they had forgotten the core values of that religion. So to bring back, to re-establish faith in that religion, to re-establish real faith or shraddha, a faith based on conviction of its core principles and validated by his own spiritual experiences. So when he said all religions lead to the same path, he did not theoretically bring about some kind of harmony. He said all religions really lead to the same goal because I have seen them all. He saw all the different paths leading to the same goal, and based on that experience, he concluded and he had that real Shraddha, or he inculcated that real Shraddha or faith in the people who had perhaps lost faith in their own religion, because each religion over a period of time, each faith, you can say, not religion. Religion is one. Faiths can be many, paths can be many. That is what he said. So the incarnations or these prophets come to discover new paths to the same realization, to the realization of Brahman or God, whichever way you name him, truth, Brahman, God, and moksha or nirvana. These are the different names used to describe truth. And in every age, the Lord comes, or the Lord himself incarnates. That is the typical Indian theory, that an avatara has to come whenever the need is felt to re-establish religion in every age. So and this was, we saw in the last class, that the Puranas tried to establish this idea of avatara. So the authors of these Puranas, they not only noted down the different attributes which I said, which these prophets possess, and by which all the great scholars, Puranic scholars or Puranic sadhakas, those who follow these Puranas, they understand by seeing the characteristic or attributes of a person, whether he is an incarnation or not. So that was what happened when Sri Ramakrishna, when people were claiming or people were saying that here is a divine personality who has extraordinary powers which which enable a person to have faith in his own religion and have those experiences themselves. Not that he has an experience and we have to believe it. That used to happen in the past. Somebody claims that I saw God and you have to have faith in me. But that was not Sri Ramakrishna's message. His message was, I have seen him, just as Buddha said, I have reached the state of Bodhi, or the highest awareness, consciousness, which takes you to nirvana. I have seen that, and I'll show you the path by which you can also reach the same and attain the same awareness as I did. That was a unique contribution of Bhagwan Sri Buddha much before Sri Ramakrishna. So Sri Ramakrishna came to validate these different forms of religion. The other prophets also, if you watch carefully or study carefully their teachings, and especially in the light of their own life, you will find that even they had this uh, idea that truth can be attained by any of the followers or any of the followers of that particular path. Everybody had a right to attain to that same goal. So it is not that it was Buddha alone, but Buddha, because he did not believe or he did not ask people to believe in a supernatural deity or a god, he said, you can find out the path yourselves, and try to follow this path sincerely. By following this path sincerely, whatever path he found, he said, you can reach the same goal as I did. So he did not claim any special uh, status for himself. It is his disciples, long after he passed away, who made him a prophet or declared him. The same is the case with all the other prophets also. They are not honored or they are not recognized in their own lifetime. In fact, some of them are crucified. So much of opposition Jesus Christ had to face. When he said, I am the king, he meant that he was the king of the spiritual world, not the emperor of the universe. So the Roman kings and the others, they felt that this is, he is trying to gain popularity and try to establish a kingdom parallel to ours. So they were thinking, because they could not think higher, and that's why they crucified him. So a prophet is always misunderstood in his own, during his own lifetime, and it is only after his passing away normally. But such is not the case. In Sri Ramakrishna's case, you'll find that he was honored even during his own lifetime. That's what Swami Vivekananda says. Most of the prophets and most of the so-called incarnations, uh, if you accept that word for a prophet or a incarnation or a saint or some great spiritual leader or personality, most of them are gain recognition, though they are venerated when they are alive, but they gain more and more recognition with the passing of time. And it takes a while to, history is witness to this fact, that it takes a while for people or the followers to declare him as a prophet. So that is what we find in history. Whereas the Puranas, they had noted the attributes of this ever recurring phenomena of an avatara. He says, whenever there is a decline, whenever eternal or universal religion, which is one, the truth, it the followers of certain particular religion, they dilute it, they dilute the message, then religion declines with the passage of time. And the reason Swami Shardananji gives is, or the Puranas give, is that people are infatuated by the inscrutable power of Maya. So that is what Vedanta believes in, that it is the inscrutable power of Maya that people forget the, uh, people lead their lives in such a way with the belief that this world and its mundane enjoyments are there all in all. That is the major mistake that the adherents or followers of different religions make. It's not that they do it intentionally, their senses draw them downwards. And people gravitate to this fact that the enjoyments of the world, the belief of this world, the truth, they believe that this is what is truth. This is what we experience. Why should we let go of that? Let us enjoy this world, because that is what the senses tell us. So it requires a heroic person, as the Kathopanishad said, It requires dhiraha, kashchit dhira antaratmanam aikshat. It requires tremendous courage, more than that of becoming an emperor or a monarch. That's why Swami Vivekananda said, unless you have the strength of a monarch who has having ruled the external world, who having had that experience, gone through that experience, he finds that real power, just as Alexander discovered when he was lying dying, grabbing a handful of earth in his fist, knowing that that is all he's taking with him when he's dying. So that realization comes to the emperors, to the so-called monarchs of the world, and that certain kind of world weariness. World weariness simply means not to hate the world, but to know for certain that no matter how much we possess, how many enjoyments we have, this world is not all in all. It is just, you can say, a part of the whole plan of creation. The Annamaya Kosha, the Pranamaya Kosha, which appears as the different diverse elements in this universe, which we use to enjoy mm, uh, the world, the mundane world, the so-called gross world. That results, I mean, that gives the impression that this world is so real that this is the only thing that is worth pursuing. And these people believe, more and more people start believing that this Atman, or the words such as Atman, God, liberation, and other eternal transcendental realities, they are mere poetic fancies. That's what people believed, that Rig Veda, they are all poetry. Like a poet sits down and imagines fanciful things, or as a novelist writes certain things which border on some kind of fancy, an illusory dream, which people normally have. So that is what a majority of the people believe. Okay, let us leave this idea of religion. It's just a poet's fancy. The Upanishads, the Bible, and all those atheists believe that it's the imagination of these great, the so-called great prophets or the avatars. Even if they have heard about it, they say it's just poet's fancy. And in the name of these, in the name of these people, great personalities whose historicity cannot be verified, they even go to the extent of saying that how can you verify the historicity of Krishna, the Rama, and Jesus? Is there any physical evidence? Just as we see people around us, have we seen them? So this can be just poetic fancy, some stories, some cock and bull stories written by these people, and who consider Atman, God, liberation, and other transcendental realities as truth. They must be out of their mind. They must be dreaming that such a state exists, that nirvana exists, that moksha exists. We do not know. We don't experience that state when we are alive. As long as we are enjoying the world, as long as things are going uh, fine for us. So the such people, a majority of these people who thrive in this world, they achieve wealth, their worldly pleasures, some way or the other, either by hook or by crook. It's supposed to be uh, extremely clever for a person to somehow gather, whether it is through moral principles, ethically or unethically, some way or the other, you acquire wealth, you outwit others, and try to gather as much of wealth as possible and other things, pleasures of the world around yourself. And that is supposed to be the height of achievement. You call a person successful if somebody is successful in doing that. So they achieve wealth, worldly pleasures one way or the other, and but cannot satisfy their heart's desires. They find, like Bhagwan Buddha described so beautifully, it is like a fire is already burning. Our heart, he is compared these desires to big conflagration, a fire which is burning within our hearts. And these desires serve the function of pouring ghee. I mean, that is what happens when we have more and more desires. It is like pouring ghee or some inflammable fuel into that fire, which the fire goes on burning more brightly. So that is what happens in most of the cases. So now, carried away by a dark people, most of these, majority of the vast majority of the society, when such a situation arises, they are carried away by endless current of despair. They 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 see that when things don't go their way, of course when things go their way they are not bothered, but when their desires are not fulfilled, when everything is getting obstructed, the suffering, as Buddha said, the or as the Vedanta says, the three types of suffering assail a person. He is subject to these three types of suffering. He sees nothing but a dark, endless world where he is crying out in agony and trying to free himself from that agony. He wants to be delivered. So, uh, under such circumstances, what happens that the avatara or this great people have to incarnate. There is no other way. He finds that it is not possible for a human being to fight this battle of suffering himself. He needs some assistance. So, when a large number of people join in this cry, they cry out in agony together, and the world seems to coming to an end. Everybody feels, why is society so bad? Why is the situation so bad? It's not just the pandemic that causes suffering. Pandemic is one way suffering comes to this world. There are other pandemics. There are mental issues, health issues. There are other issues, economic issues, political issues, quarrels, and all the struggles that a human being has to face, both at the individual and the collective level. So, when such things happen to a vast majority of people, a strange phenomena takes place. That is what our scriptures, the Puranas especially, they say that when such situations arise, when the dark ages come, so there is the need for a prophet who can shed light and remove all the darkness of ignorance. So the powerful Ishvara makes an eternal religion which is always eternal, but temporarily people have misunderstood this eternal religion. So they come as shining pillars of light, as Swamiji has described him. He says Sri Krishna is a shining pillar of light of eternal Vedic religion, and he has shed the light. Without his light, we cannot understand. We will be groping around in darkness. That's what he says. He has made a few wonderful remarks about Sri Krishna, though he has not written a biography like the great master. He has given hints now and then. So he says Sri Krishna was a brilliant or a shining pillar of light. Pillar of light. Shiva, in fact, Shiva is also described. Many people, especially the Shiva Mahimna Stotra, the hymn of greatness uh, dedicated to Shiva, describes Shiva as a bright pillar of light. With its beginning, there's no beginning, no end. It's a very, very indefinitely long pillar of light, shedding uh, brightness, shedding clarity all around it. So, an incarnation is supposed to be luminous. That's what scriptures describe these people. The all powerful Ishvara makes eternal religion or the ideas of core values of each religion luminous like the moon. And the example is given that just as the moon comes out of the eclipse, and illuminates everything. The moonlight is shed over the entire earth. Similarly, out of compassion for human weakness, the Lord takes a human form and puts humanity on the spiritual path. He shows, he shows through his own glowing example. He sheds light on all the dark or hidden corners and says, see, this is how you have misunderstood. It is ignorance that makes you see things because there is darkness. Now, in the bright light of knowledge, you can follow this spiritual path. So as there cannot be we know according to the theory of karma whether you accept the incarnation or not, whether you accept the avatara or not. Even Buddha accepts the effect of cause and effect. He says karma theory you have to accept because there's no other way. We see in the whole world is run by this principle of cause and effect. So whatever be, if there is an effect, if we see an effect, there has to be a cause. So God in his Leela, never, whenever he comes to play the human Leela, Nara Leela as they call it in Hinduism, he has to take a human body to play the Leela. Otherwise, how can he come and mix with us? If he comes in a celestial body, as some of the scriptures promise that he comes in a celestial body, many people may not accept him because that way they don't, that God who appears to them like that seems to be an unrealistic human being, a unrealistic phenomena, and they don't get inspiration, though they now and then people might see some strange light or some strange illumination, but it does not persist, because unless he is born, assumes a human body with the purpose of removing the sufferings of humanity, and lives and mixes with people like one of them, then according to the Puranas, unless such avatars appear when the situation is bad, society does not change its attitude. They continue to be groping in darkness. So, when a lot of suffering affects every part of society, it affects different levels of society. It affects the good people, those who are following ethical values, dharma. It affects the bad people. That is why you see in the Mahabharata, it was the good suffering of the good people that made the Lord come. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavata bharata abhyuttanam adharmasya tadatmanam srujamyaham paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya cha dushkritam. So, to destroy the wicked, destroy the evildoers, and to support, because in the law of Prakriti is such that this Ishvara or incarnation comes when good people suffer. Paritranaya sadhunam. Sadhu means good people. So whoever is good, if they are unnecessarily subject to trouble, and vinashaya cha dushkritam dharma sansthapanarthaya sambhavami yuge yuge. That is the Gita verse, the famous verse which declares, where Sri Krishna declares, I come again and again in every age, not just as Krishna, as some of the followers of Krishna who believe that there's only one incarnation, following the Semitic trend of thought. They say that it is only Krishna and Krishna alone who is an incarnation. And they quote so many verses from the Bhagavad Gita, but why can't they quote this? Yada yada hi dharmasya. Whenever there is glani, glani means chaos or trouble. When dharmic people or people who follow dharma, when they suffer, then paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya cha dushkritam, to destroy the evil-minded people, both in the subtle and the gross way. In some cases, he comes to destroy them physically, as in the case of Sri Krishna. In some cases, or even Rama, who came to destroy all the tamasic people. In a gross way, battles had to be fought. But sometimes he destroys them like Sri Ramakrishna did, Samshaya Rakshasa, there was no demon to be destroyed. But the demon in the form of Samshaya, doubt, skepticism, ignorance, people making fun of religion, people who had lost faith. Even Swami Vivekananda used to make fun. All this is delusion, the mother that you see. How can you prove that it is not a delusion? Can you show God to me? So that was the impact of modern education in the modern world. And samshaya, that is doubt, which was created by this so-called reasoning based on physical realities. So that is what science brought, a kind of skepticism, and it broke the pillars of organized religion. The core values remained intact, but unfortunately, it's beginning with Europe, where the Renaissance, where the scientific and technological Renaissance, which was the result of the great effort of the scientists who were searching for truth in the physical world, they seem to be happy with the fact that science and technology are enough to solve all the problems of life. Though their theory was fallacious, they were not uh, on the right path, but at least to fight organized religion, it was a very great tool. And as Swami Vivekananda says in his lectures from Colombo to Almora, he says the organized efforts of religion were being broken by science and technology, rationality of science and technology, and they were being broken like the porcelain vessels. Just as porcelain cracks when somebody strikes it, they break into pieces. So organized religion was being broken everywhere in Europe, especially in the Western world. They said, why we don't need all sorts of dogmas and superstitions. They have only led to quarrels. So they broke the very backbone of organized religion, and they appeared to totally decry religion. As Swamiji said, that when uh, you are washing a baby and you are supposed to wash the baby and throw the water in the big vessel in which you are washing that baby, you have to throw the water which has been used for washing when it becomes dirty, but you don't throw the baby along with it. It served some purpose. After it serves its purpose, the gross things have to be thrown. So also in organized religion, there are certain external rituals, external things which one should not adhere to or hold on adamantly, thinking that is the core of religion. And if at all science came, they said this is dirty water, you have to throw it. That was fine. We have to throw the dirty water, but why do you throw the baby along with it? That is how science tried to destroy the very foundations of religion, dharma, as it is known as in India. They tried to destroy the foundations of all religion, and along with that, they in their haste to destroy the external incrustations of different kinds which had uh, accumulated or gathered over these core principles. They removed those, they broke it to pieces, and Swamiji says it is good it happened, that these unhealthy things which were passing in the name of religion, if the sooner they are destroyed, these beliefs, these dogmas, this infrastructure which they had created, this artificial infrastructure they had created, if it is the sooner they are destroyed, the better, because then the core values are exposed and then people might take to these core values. So yada yada dharmasya glani, whenever there is glani or there is a decay in religion, in real religion, then abhyutanam adharmasya, to destroy the old the dogmas and the rituals and all the unnecessary encrustations which had gathered around the core of religion. To destroy that, a prophet has to come, and he does it according to the need of the hour. So when Sri Ramakrishna came, the need was to destroy this uh, samshaya, belief, that doubt which had crept, because science and technology and rational thought had already destroyed the things which were hindering the core values from expressing themselves, and they had done a great favor. They had cleared the ground already, and so it became easy for Sri Ramakrishna when he came in an age where he had to re-establish faith. He had to re-establish faith. He did not have to destroy anything. All he had to destroy is the faith. All he had to destroy is the lack of faith or doubt which had crept in the mind of genuine people regarding the efficacy of religion to transform their lives. So, when suffering comes, these things, according to the Puranas, become possible when a large number of people ignorantly suffer because they throw away the baby along with the water. They throw away the core values also. Then society cannot survive. So, God's infinite mercy, according to the Puranas, crystallizes, as it were. They come as human beings and they appear as world teachers. So, the authors of the Puranas came to the conclusion about when they observed that repeatedly, as Sri Krishna had promised in the Gita, yada yadai dharmasya, whenever there is, it's not that he comes only once, he can come any number of times. Whenever there is a need, I will come. And that is a promise made by Sri Krishna, who spoke on behalf of all the previous incarnations and the future incarnations. So, repeated occurrence or appearance, you can say, avatarana, that means actually, avatarana is a word which says you come down. So, God has to come down from the divine state and assume a apparently lower state of a human being, because human being has to be raised. So he comes down out of his infinite grace and mercy. That is how even the Bible accepts that the Father in heaven sends the Son, and the Father can be known only through the Son. Means the Son has to come in physical form, as whether you call him Avtara or a prophet, he comes in a physical form so that people uh, come to know the path, come to know how they can extricate themselves from the misery they have caused for themselves, how to get rid of ignorance. So that is how Puranas believe that repeatedly these people have to come, these incarnations have to appear. So, because religion needs to be re-established again and again, they come in different forms, they come to fulfill different needs, because the needs of every age are different, the problems of every age are different. There is evolution at the physical level, at the mental level, in the intellectual level. Society is not the same as it was when Jesus came, as it was when Buddha came, as it was when other prophets came, and the great incarnations came. They came for solving a particular problem of mankind, which were apparently localized. So when Muhammad came, or when any other prophet came, they came to solve the problems of their local geographical limitation. Of course, they spread later on, but when they came with the intention of solving the problems of a limited geographical space. The same thing can be said. Maybe Sri Ramakrishna found that the place where he incarnated was the place which needed him the most. So, but that doesn't mean he comes only for that particular location. Just as you can't say that Jesus came only for the areas in which he manifested his divinity, for the place or for the people of the place where he was born. He came for the entire world. So also the people who belong to Islam, they believe that their prophet came not only for solving some problems, the local problems, though his solution were based on that, but his core values, they core values of all religions, they transcend the limited role that the incarnation perhaps plays. So the role he had to play, any of these prophets, including Sri Ramakrishna, had to play under local circumstances and local conditions. They are not the only problems. They are not the only solutions. We have to look upon them and find out what are their core values, which are true even hundreds of years after their passing away. Maybe after several centuries, their relevance decreases and somebody else has to come. So that is how our Hindu religion, or the Sanatana Vedic religion, believes that the God is not a closed book. The book of God is not a closed book. The pages are still being written, and newer pages will be written, and newer incarnations will come. So an omniscient one who knows the past, present, and future is what we define an avatara. Avatara is defined as one who knows the past, present, and future, which is equivalent to Ishvara. So he comes as a world teacher to fulfill the need of that age. India, as Swami Shardananji notes, that has been sanctified by these footprints of innumerable avataras. It's a coincidence that most of these great prophets were born in India, though it is not necessary that they should be born in India, but they were. Even now, when the need arises, avataras with illimitable virtues apparently are born in India. It is well known that only a little over, say, 400 or 450 years ago, Bhagwan Sri Chaitanya came. He came with a particular mission. So whether you call him a partial incarnation or a full incarnation, as some of the followers of Krishna believe, that he was a Purna Avatara. Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam, all other avatars, even if they have come, they are lesser people. That's not the thing which, no doubt, for a follower of a particular religion or a particular prophet, this prophet is the greatest. But that doesn't mean that the others are, because their roles are different, they appear to be solving those problems in a restricted way. So Bhagavan Sri Chaitanya, when he came, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he overwhelmed the people. His solution was different. He aroused their passion through bhakti by chanting the name of Hari. So he said, this is the path for most of you. You just don't bother about philosophy. Though he was a great scholar, he said, don't bother about religion. Just chant the name of Lord. So the question Swami Shardanji asked is, has such a time recurred? Before even trying to explain the life and message of Sri Ramakrishna as an avatara, he says, have we come, do we really, I mean, when he wrote this book, he is asking the contemporary readers to satisfy the need of the present age, maybe 150 years ago. Had such a time recurred, as was adharma at its height? So what compelled? What overwhelming, just as Chaitanya was compelled to spread the name of Hari, he was misunderstood. Many people did not like his preaching. So because he showed a new path. So incarnations are compelled, according to our scriptures, they are compelled to come again and again. And when they come with a different message which suits the religion of that day. And just as history shows that these great prophets or these great avatars come with overwhelming compassion, which compel them to come in every age, and which tries to re-establish religion in a geographical location which was in those days viewed as poor, inglorious, contempt, full of contempt by the foreign invading powers. So for several centuries, people in India were told that you are useless, because so many foreigners, whoever wanted, came and ruled over the Indian subcontinent. So people really thought that there is something wrong in our religion, and we are in the present state. Anybody who wants to come and conquer us, they come and establish a rule over us. So people were subject, and this was not just because of our lack of faith, but because we were brainwashed to think the Indian subcontinent, the people who were suffering, who were enslaved, or maybe you can say who were colonized by different world powers, who thought that the might of the gross will always rule supreme over the people. And they also tried to, they lost faith in religion, and they thought religion is just a superstition. Many of the great scholars, or many of the great Western educated people of graduates, they started instilling doubt in the minds of simple, innocent people who had faith. They said, you have followed gods for such a long time. Where have your gods come to help you? So they said that you forget. Even Swamiji said that millions and millions of years, gods you worship and you die like dogs. What he meant was that give up that adherence to all the rituals and the externals of religion, go back to the core of religion. And he said this not only to Hindus, but also to all the religious people all over the world where religion was at a decline. He said, he told the Christians, you go back to Christ, because the way Christ's message has been interpreted over a period of time, it has got diluted. So also he told the Hindus, you go back to the Vedas, you go back to the original scriptures, and you try to understand. But to understand these scriptures in this age, it was, according to Swamiji, Sri Krishna came as a pillar of light, not to start a new sect or a new religion, but to show what these eternal principles are. So in the light of Sri Krishna's teachings, he said, go back to the Vedas. He didn't say Sri Krishna's teaching are our scriptures. He said the Vedas, the eternal religion of the Vedas, they are our scriptures. So every time when the core values have been misunderstood and ignorance is spread over a certain geographical location, then these incarnations appear in those locations. And they start with that particular location, but then their power, if they are great enough, the power spreads all over the world. So Sri Krishna, Swami Shardanji now places before us a wonderful introduction before he introduces the life of Sri Krishna, that once again, as per Bhagavad Gita's promise, India has been blessed to witness the advent of the Supreme One, the Supreme Ishvara, to fulfill the need of the age. Now, what is the need of the age, and who was this Sri Krishna? So, Swami Shardanji concludes by saying, he who was born as Rama. These were Thakur's own words to Naren, a doubting Naren, when he said, Swami Shardanji is just repeating what Sri Krishna said. He said, one who was born long ago as Rama and also as Krishna in a different age has now come again to re-establish real religion. Now he will try to, through the other chapters, he will try to establish this fact that the characteristics of an avatara, if when they are applied as described by the Puranas, the various attributes and the various things that have been recorded in the case of the past incarnations, if they are applied to Sri Krishna, then we get a clear idea why he has incarnated and what is the situation that made him come and what was the solution he proposed and how did he re-establish religion. So first there should be a need. So what is the need of that age that is described in the first chapter? This was the introduction, and in the introduction he beautifully, Swami Shardananji so nicely explains, prepares the groundwork before even he starts describing the biography, he first has to explain why incarnations come and what is the need for them to come, and how they come and how they act. So, first of all, is now in the first chapter, we'll just begin this, there's some time left. He says, what is the need, or what was the need of the age that made Sri Ramakrishna be born? What was the problem? What was the struggle, or what was the suffering which people, a large number of people in society collectively were facing? So now he is trying to find out the conditions under which Sri Ramakrishna appeared. Before even he discusses what are his attributes, what is his contribution, he says, even an ordinary person of the present age, I mean, he's talking of 1900 and around 1900 and first 1910 when he wrote that book, situation would have changed a little bit the last, over a period of last 100 years or so. But more or less, if we see history, 100 years is a very small period, So things have not drastically changed. The problems are the same. So that's why he uses the word the present age. And when we use the present age, we have to apply the same yardsticks, because not that the problems have changed much. If we see, if we are trying to understand what Swami Shardanand is trying to tell us, then we'll understand what is the problem that they faced and made Sri Ramakrishna come as an incarnation, and what is the problem we face and how relevant is his message. So he says, first he says, it is even easy for an ordinary person to see the extent to which human beings are making progress all over the world. Before even spelling out the problems, he said, everybody thinks or knows that there is lot of progress made in the world. It was true in those days, now it is more true, through knowledge, wealth, and self-effort. So human beings have suddenly found a strange kind of energy through which they are doing wonderfully in the external world. It seems, he is using the words very carefully, it seems that every area of life, apparently, people do not want to be confined to a limited sphere. Everything is becoming global. Earlier, people were happy. They were uh, happy within their own community, within their own geographical location. At the most, there were some traders who occasionally used to go abroad and sell some things which were not available in that country and bring. The trade was going on, but interaction was limited. It was confined to a local area. But even in those days, when planes were not there, Swami Shardanand says, dissatisfied planes were just about to be discovered. So dissatisfied with traveling on land and water, which took a lot of time, Swami Shardanand says, now they have invented the aeroplane. This was a new thing. You should remember that this was spoken 100 years ago, when aeroplanes were practically recent and new. And it took, even those aeroplanes took a lot of time to move from one country to another. Compared to ship, of course, they were very, very fast. So he's talking of reducing distances. Now, distances are further reduced when communication and interaction, even the communication has become so fast. Information and communication technology has made things, has converted the whole world into a global village. Now, everybody can instantly connect with each other. So, extending this argument, Swami Shardanji's argument that they have invented the aeroplane and they have satisfied their curiosity gives another example where people used to dive to the bottom of the sea and explore the erupting volcanoes which are below, which was not possible in before 100 years ago, 100 years before they were born. These things were unimaginable, that somebody could go and explore the bottom of the seabed. Just as they explained, uh, uh, they tried to explain the glories of all the nature by climbing mountains. They tried to unravel the mysteries of nature. He is first praising and telling what society are we born in. So peaks and perpetually snow-clad mountains are accessible now because of modern technology. Oceans are being crossed by wonderful ships, and they have discovered signs of life similar to their own in creepers, trees, and other plants. This was said much before Jagdish Chandra Bose published his paper. Some of them, of course, he had published. So it was known to Swami Shardanand, who was a medical student who was studying medicine but left it. He says that human beings, especially in the light of pioneering work done by Jagdish Chandra Bose, whose scientific efforts were supported by Sister Nivedita and many of the monks of the Ramakrishna mission, including Swami Shardanandji. So he had discovered that plants and creepers and trees and the so-called uh, uh, plant kingdom as opposed to animal kingdom, they also have, there are not only signs of life are seen in them, they are having the same stimulus response mechanism that animals and animal kingdom have. So through observation and experimentation, Shardanji says, a scientist has explored all the possibilities, not only human, but all the biological possibilities. What are the possibilities that can be, even the fuel and all the inanimate objects have been exploited. So, Swami Shardanji puts it so beautifully. He says how humankind has achieved this. Instead of saying just science, he says the five elements of nature: earth, water, fire, solid, liquid, gaseous, uh, plasma, and then space. These are the broad divisions which constitute our gross world. So, Swami Shardanji says, achieving control over these five elements: earth, water, fire, air, and ether, the space. They have amassed considerable knowledge of almost everything about this inanimate world. Not only the animate world of living beings, but also inanimate world, the different objects, the different reactions of the different chemicals through chemistry to physics. The secrets of the inanimate world also have been that mystery has been uh, demystified, and people have discovered. It is a scientific thing. It is no longer a miracle. Nature is no longer a miracle because science says they can explain everything through science. Most of the things, not everything, but most of the gross things they can explain. Still unsatisfied, people are trying to explore, Swami Shardanji says, far off planets and stars. They want to know. We have almost trying to understand what the earth is constituted of, the inanimate objects, the living, the non-living, and all those things. So what is there in these foreign far off planets and stars? We are exploring, we have gone beyond the horizons of mm, the geographical area known as the earth, and we are trying to go into space to find out whether there are different things, there are different objects or different living beings there. So in addition, we'll find Swami Shardanji says that humans do not lack the enthusiasm or the zeal to explore the internal world. Now, the external world, the limits have been extended. We cannot say the limits have been reached. We have not reached the limits even of the gross world. Forget the internal world. The external world also has not been fully explored. We are still trying. Many things are still mysterious for us. Science cannot explain everything. But in addition to this, some humans decided that we have explored the external world, let us explore the internal world. Now, this was done in India long ago. They explored the external world, but they did not neglect the internal world. In fact, they were fascinated more by the internal world, which is more mysterious than the external world. Every day, people are making new findings through broad experimentation and research in the internal. They are applying the same rules, the same principles, the same scientific principles of experimental verification in the internal world. So, to be a truly scientific person is not to neglect the internal world, saying that it does not exist, I am not bothered about it. Whether you are bothered about it or not, there is an internal world, there is a subtle world, and that needs to be explored. So they studied the mystery of life, how evolution took place from one species to another. That is a gross approach to searching for the inner world. What is that secret mechanism within? By reflecting on the nature of body, our body, they have ascertained the mind consists of subtle matter. Now they're talking of the Indian scientists, because the West still do not consider the mind to be some kind of subtle matter. They say mind is a phenomena which we observe, thoughts and all. Though they except for the latest discoveries in modern physics, people do not really think that the mental waves, the mind, is consists of some kind of subtle matter. Sukshma Sharira, which our Upanishads declared long ago, they knew mind is nothing different than the body. Body changes are gross in nature, the mental changes are subtle. That's why we find it difficult to grasp. They could do this because they went deep enough. So a deep internal study, just as we do external study in a scientific way, a deep internal study reveals that the microcosm, this was the great revelation Swami Vivekananda had at Almora, Kakri Ghat. He told Gangadhar, today I have found the greatest mystery of life. He says the microcosm, the internal world, and the macrocosm are regulated by the same inviolable law. It's not that the laws are different, but they work in different ways, because this is the internal world. They are subtle. It's a subtle world, and the external world is for everybody to see. But if you apply the same rules, the same principles, when you which you use for discovering things in the external world, for experimentally verifying things in the external world, why don't you do it in the internal world? So then you will discover the new laws. The laws of Newton's laws of motion may be true for the external world, but for the subtle world there are different laws. Can we claim that we have understood that? So, but still, those who are honest scientists or honest spiritual scientists, they have perceived that there is a invisible chain. Though it is not clear, it is working in a particular way of cause and effect, because they found that various mental phenomena, just as the external phenomena, you light a fire, it will start burning. So that is the dharma of the gross elements. Similarly, the mind also has its own dharma. So why do people have different mental disorders? Why, just as some gross things, the gross objects, they decay, they get spoiled, especially the organic thing, and they decompose if it is an inorganic thing. So all these things we observe in the external world. So also in the subtle world, there is this cause and effect. Why some people's minds are depressed, why they commit suicide, why mental disorders are seen in certain people and certain people have a healthy mind. So all those things are the internal subtle scientific truths which we are yet to explore, the internal world. And that is what spirituality claims to do. It says that having enjoyed the external world or discovered the secrets behind the external world, man has focused his attention on the inner world and try to find out how this mind is influenced, why my mind is not as good or as bad as your mind, why there are differences, why there are mental disorders, why there are limited capacities in certain mind. You can't always give a gross solution. The body may have something to do with the mental disorder, but it is not everything. There are other factors like the surroundings, like the causes and effects that we see in the physical world. If you burn a fire, everything will, if you light a fire in a combustible environment, then naturally the plastic or the wood will catch fire. So also the mind, if we expose it to certain thoughts, certain samskaras, certain environment, mind also will be destroyed. So though there is no external proof of eternal existence or some kind of consciousness even behind the mind or superseding the mind, that has also been a subject of study. That is what Shardananji says, that there are three aspects: the gross, the subtle, and the causal effects are understood. But is there any reality behind them? So that a study of history shows that that supreme consciousness, that awareness, or that idea of reality, what is beyond all these things? Who is doing all these things? Why are these things happening in this particular way? Who is framing these laws of cause and effect? Is there a God? This was a search which our ancestors also did. They came up with different solutions, but the present day avatars, they come with new solutions. So we will, in the next class, we will see how the impact of material progress in the West impacted and spread to the East, where the not the material progress, because they rejected material progress to a certain extent because they knew it is limited. They went into the inner world, so they made their own discoveries. The Eastern people, they shared it with the West, and Swami Vivekananda said that we need both to survive. At a lower level, we need the external science and technology, but at the internal level, we also need to know the science of the subtle mind. When both these knowledges, both these systems of knowledges are combined or interact with each other, mankind will be happy. So we will discuss that topic in our next class. So I'll just come to the question answers and let us see if there are, yeah. So the first question is, given their universal outlook, should followers of Sri Ramakrishna Thakur be considered as Hindus or as a separate religious sect? Now, Sri Ramakrishna did not like anybody classifying themselves as by particular name. He used the word Sanatana Dharma. So when he said Sanatana Dharma, he not only meant the Hindus, which is of course the Hindus believe that they belong to an eternal religion because they believe in principles. So in a restricted way, yes, he would like us to identify ourselves with Hindus in the broadest sense of the term. But at the same time, whoever follows the principles of Sanatana Dharma, that's why he says all these dogmatic religions will come and go, but Sanatana Dharma will continue. Many people interpret it and say that Sanatana Dharma here means Hinduism. Yes, Hinduism can be part, or any other ism can be said to be following the Sanatana Dharma if they adopt universal values. Now, how much of universal ideas or values we hold dear to our heart and establish a kind of harmony with other people having different views, that to that extent we will succeed in understanding Sri Ramakrishna and understanding its implications. So whether you say Ramakrishna movement is a separate movement, a separate religious sect, no, that was never the intention of even Swami Vivekananda. He said, I have not been born to start a separate movement. I want to create individuals and groups, or collectively or individually, people who would believe in this eternal religion, eternal principles of truth as expressed by Vedanta. Vedanta is also a name. When you finally go to the core values of Vedas, then Tatra Veda Aveda Bhavati. They had the courage to say that throw away all the other things. When you reach the core, you don't need any support from the Vedas. So in that sense, you cannot even say that you are Vedantic. You begin the path of Vedanta, or you begin following any path, any genuine path which takes you to realization. And when you realize, then you are all the same with all the people of different paths. They converge to the same goal. So in that sense, there is no sect. So, but still, to understand this fact, what sectarianism is and what sectarianism is not, you will get a very good guidance from the life and teachings of Sri Ramakrishna. That is why, in that sense, we are a sect, but it is beyond all sects. It is a sectless sect. It is not a separate movement. Though it is a separate movement, it is not a restricted movement. It's ever growing a movement which always expands its limitations, its frontiers. It goes to embrace all. It is one of the most inclusive movements in the history of the world. Sri Ramakrishna himself was very inclusive, and Holy Mother Sharda Devi, whose wonderful life we are discussing on Tuesday, and her Gospel of Holy Mother, she was in fact a step ahead. Like Sri Ramakrishna, she was totally universal in her approach. And of course, that universal truth was what Swami Vivekananda preached in the West. So I think I have answered your question. Let me see if there is one more question, and then we will disperse. So tomorrow, as usual, we'll be discussing the Raj Yoga. I don't see any question. If somebody wants, I can just, some of them may not be familiar or very much conversant with the chat system. So I'll allow you to unmute yourself, and if somebody has some question, they can even raise their hands or speak out by unmuting themselves. I'll do it for a few minutes, otherwise there'll be a lot of noise. I mean, if all start speaking together. If there are questions, you can answer, or you can ask. Yeah, I don't think there are any further questions. So I'll take leave and we'll meet tomorrow. Tomorrow, of course, the timing, as I have announced before, will be from 7 to 8, the Raj Yoga class, because it's a weekday. It will not be, and only Saturday and Sunday, as usual, it will be at 5:45 GMT, London time. On Saturdays, that is just the 5:45 for Gospel of Holy Mother, 4:45 according to the Indian time, the 4:45 of the London time, Indian time is 10:15. So because that Gita class is being conducted by our university in India, they stick to one time, and for them it is, for us it is 4:45, and for them it is 10:15. So Gita classes will always be at 4:45, whereas the Holy Mother's Gospel will be at 5:45 as usual, and the Sunday class will be at 5:30. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.